Picture the basement of Greater Mount Zion AME in Memphis on a Saturday afternoon in 1971. Two long folding tables run the length of the fellowship hall, both covered in white sheets borrowed from the women's auxiliary. A bride in a borrowed veil stands by a punch bowl that came up from her aunt's china cabinet on Beale Street. The cake on the corner table is 3 tiers of coconut, frosted white, dusted with shredded coconut shaved that morning. Number 16 on this list was sliced cold from a glass dish and disappeared by 4. Number 12 sat on a silver tray that only came out for funerals and weddings. Number 5 on this list was wrapped in a paper napkin and tucked into a purse to take home. While modern receptions now run on catered chafing dishes and rented linens, these tables ran on the hands of women who had been promised the kitchen at 15. Let's count down from 25. Number 25, hot yeast rolls wrapped in damp dish towels. Yeast rolls came out of 2 ovens on the morning of the wedding, one in the bride's mother's kitchen, one in the church basement. The dough had been mixed Friday night by a deacon's wife who measured nothing. Flour, sugar, lard, scalded milk, a packet of Fleischmann's. The rolls came out golden, brushed with melted butter, stacked in a roasting pan, covered with a wet flour sack towel to keep them soft until 2 o'clock. The towel was the secret. Without it, the rolls hardened in the hour between the ceremony and the receiving line. Guests pulled them apart with their fingers, no knives. Each roll cracked open with steam still inside. By 1988, the deacon's wife had passed, the recipe lived in nobody's hand, and the rolls on the church table came from a bag in the freezer aisle. The towel went with her. Number 24, smoked country ham with a brown sugar glaze. The ham was hung in a smokehouse outside Camden, South Carolina for 9 months before it ever came north. It arrived in a flour sack on a Trailways bus, salt-cured, dark as walnut on the rind. The bride's father scrubbed the rind under cold water for an hour, soaked the ham overnight in a roasting pan in the bathtub, then baked it slow on Saturday morning. Cloves stuck in a diamond pattern, brown sugar, dry mustard, and a splash of Coca-Cola brushed on every 20 minutes. The slices came thin off the bone, served on the church platter that had belonged to a great aunt born in 1898. A pinch of red pepper sat in a saucer next to it. By the late 1980s, the smokehouse outside Camden had been torn down for a strip of highway, and the wedding ham on the church table was deli sliced from the Piggly Wiggly. Number 23, wedding punch in a borrowed crystal bowl. On the long table, set on a square of lace from the auxiliary closet, sat a cut glass punch bowl that did not belong to anyone in the wedding. The bowl had been borrowed from the church mother 3 doors down. It came in a cardboard box wrapped in a folded quilt to keep the cut glass from chipping. Inside the bowl, the punch sat pink. Pineapple juice, frozen orange concentrate, 2 bottles of ginger ale poured in at the last minute so the bubbles still rose when the bride dipped her cup. A ring of frozen lemonade with strawberry slices floated on top in place of regular ice because regular ice diluted the sweet. Children stood on tiptoe to see in. By 1989, the crystal bowl had been packed away in a basement on Florida Avenue. The church mother had passed, and the wedding punch on a folding table came from a plastic gallon jug. Number 22, smothered chicken in cream gravy. The chickens came from a yard in Greenwood, Mississippi, dressed by the bride's grandmother on Friday morning before the train left, packed in an ice cooler that traveled north with 3 women in the backseat of a Buick. Saturday morning, they got cut into pieces, salted, peppered, dredged in flour, browned in a heavy skillet of lard, and finished in a covered roasting pan with onion gravy poured over the top. The gravy was cream, not stock, because the wedding day was the one day cream went into the pan. The chicken sat on the table in a chafing dish with a sterno can underneath. The thigh was always claimed first, then the leg. The breast went last because it was dry. By 1990, the chicken in the church basement was catered fried chicken in a foil tray, and the smothering pan stayed home. Number 21, pimento cheese ribbon sandwiches on white bread with the crust cut off. In 1967, on the morning of a wedding in Tuskegee, 3 women stood at a kitchen counter cutting the crusts off 4 loaves of sunbeam bread. Hands moved without looking. The pimento cheese had been mixed the night before. Sharp cheddar grated by hand. A jar of pimentos drained on a paper towel. Mayonnaise, a spoon of grated onion, a shake of cayenne. The mixture sat overnight to thicken. Saturday morning, the women spread it on the trimmed bread in 3 layers, alternated with thin slices of cucumber, pressed down with a baking sheet for an hour, then cut into ribbons. Each tray held 30. The ribbons came out striped white, orange, pale green. Guests held them between 2 fingers, no plates. By 1991, the women had moved into nursing care, and the wedding sandwiches on the table were grocery store croissants. Number 20, deviled eggs dusted with paprika. At every reception in every fellowship hall, from Mobile to Gary, the deviled egg platter sat on the corner of the table closest to the door because deviled eggs were the first thing guests reached for after the receiving line. 2 dozen eggs, hard-boiled Friday night, peeled while warm-halved Saturday morning. The yolks were mashed with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, a teaspoon of yellow mustard, a shake of vinegar. The filling went back into the whites with a spoon, never a piping bag, because a piping bag would have made the platter look store-bought. Paprika dusted across the top from a tin shaker. A sprig of parsley on each plate, set there by the niece who had been allowed to help for the first time. The platter was the same one that had carried deviled eggs to her mother's wedding in 1949. By 1992, the niece had stopped making them, and the eggs on the table at her own daughter's reception came pre-stuffed from Sam's Club. Number 19, coconut layer cake with 7-minute frosting. The deepest dish on this list. A coconut layer cake with 7-minute frosting was the cake on every black wedding table from Charleston to Chicago in the years between the war and the Reagan administration. The recipe came up out of low country kitchens by way of cooks who had perfected it for white families and quietly kept it for their own. Cooks across Simpson County, Kentucky, recorded their versions in community cookbooks decades later, and the recipe they put down was almost identical to one a great-grandmother in Beaufort had been baking in 1923. 3 cake layers, each made with separated eggs, the whites whipped to soft peaks and folded in last. Between each layer, a coconut filling cooked on the stove with milk and butter and freshly grated meat from a brown coconut cracked open with a hammer on the back porch that morning. The frosting was 7-minute frosting, beaten over a double boiler until it stood in glossy white peaks, then spread thick while still warm. A snowfall of grated coconut over the top. The cake had to be made by Friday because the layers needed 24 hours to soak the filling. Through the early 1970s, almost every coconut cake on a black wedding table in Mississippi was baked by somebody inside the family, by a generation of women who learned the cake from their own mothers and did not write the recipe down. By 1985, with the rise of commercial wedding bakeries in suburban shopping plazas, the homemade coconut cake had slid almost entirely off the wedding table. A grandmother in Birmingham could still bake it in 1987, but her granddaughter wanted fondant, and the brown coconut on the back porch was the first thing to go. What I keep returning to is who ate the last slice. Number 18, Lane cake soaked in bourbon. Emma Rylander Lane published the recipe in Clayton, Alabama in 1898, and 70 years later, a Lane cake still sat on the corner of every black wedding table in the Black Belt counties, carried into kitchens by cooks who had perfected it long before the cookbook. 4 layers of white sponge made with 8 egg whites. Between the layers, a filling of egg yolks cooked on the stove with butter, sugar, raisins, chopped pecans, and bourbon poured in at the end. The bourbon was the point. A Lane cake had to sit 3 days for the bourbon to soak through, so the bride's mother started it on Wednesday for a Saturday wedding. The cake came out of an enameled bread box where it had aged, dusted with powdered sugar, sliced thin because each slice was rich enough to lean back from. By 1989, the bourbon had been quietly replaced with rum extract in most of the recipes that survived, and the 3-day rest had collapsed into a Saturday morning bake. The cake disappeared not because the recipe was lost, but because the patience for 3 days of waiting was lost first. Number 17, pound cake from a Sara Lee box, sliced thick on a silver tray. Slicing a pound cake on a silver tray at a wedding in 1974 in Newark, New Jersey was a quiet ceremony of its own. The cake had come out of a yellow box in the Pathmark freezer aisle on Thursday evening, sat overnight on the counter, and got pulled out Saturday morning by the bride's mother, who had worked 2 shifts that week and was not apologizing. The frozen Sara Lee pound cake was sliced thick, fanned out on a tray that had belonged to a great aunt, set next to the homemade coconut cake without comment. The cake was the cake the working mother could bring to her own daughter's wedding without losing the morning. By 1990, the freezer aisle cake had become the dominant cake on the working class wedding table. The homemade pound cake had moved into the once-a-year holiday slot, and the silver tray under the Sara Lee had been put away because it was harder to wash than the foil pan the next caterer brought. Number 16, sweet potato custard pie in a glass dish. Sweet potato pie on a wedding table in 1968 was a quiet argument with the white wedding cake tradition. The pie was the deepest pan on the dessert table, baked in a glass Pyrex dish, so the brown bottom showed through. Sweet potatoes roasted Thursday night in the oven, peeled while warm, mashed with evaporated milk and 4 eggs and a cup of brown sugar. Cinnamon, nutmeg, a teaspoon of vanilla. The filling went into a homemade lard crust and baked until the top cracked. Abby Fisher, born enslaved in South Carolina, had published one of the first American sweet potato pie recipes in 1881, and the wedding pie on the table in 1968 was almost the same pie, made by a great-granddaughter who had never read the book. Children always asked for sweet potato pie before the coconut cake because they knew the pie would run out first. By 1990, the pie had retreated almost entirely to Thanksgiving. Number 15, chicken and dressing in a long hotel pan. Across the South in the 1970s, the chicken and dressing pan was the centerpiece of the Savory side of the wedding table, set in a deep aluminum hotel pan with a serving spoon stuck upright in the middle. The dressing was cornbread, made Friday morning, crumbled overnight in a roasting pan, mixed Saturday with sage and onion, and chopped celery and chicken broth from a stewing hen the bride's grandmother had simmered all night. Whole chicken pieces sat on top of the dressing. The whole pan went in the oven and came out brown on the corners. A ladle of giblet gravy got poured over each plate. The hotel pan was borrowed from the church kitchen. By 1992, the dressing on the table came from a stovetop box and the stewing hen was gone. Number 14, pole beans with new potatoes. Pole beans cooked on the back of the stove for 3 hours with a piece of smoked ham hock, an onion, a tablespoon of bacon grease, and a handful of new potatoes the size of a child's fist. The beans came from a backyard in Decatur, Georgia, picked Thursday afternoon by the bride's aunt, snapped in a colander Friday night while the women talked about who was sitting where. The pot stayed on a low flame, lid on until the beans were tender enough to cut with a fork. The potatoes sank to the bottom and absorbed the pot liquor. The whole pot went into a chafing tray on the wedding table next to the chicken, a pinch of red pepper, and a small bowl beside it. By 1991, the backyard in Decatur had been paved for a driveway, the bean pole was gone, and the beans on the wedding table came from a frozen bird's eye bag cooked in 12 minutes flat. The pot liquor was gone. Number 13, macaroni pie casserole, deep dish. By 1969, the macaroni pie was no longer macaroni and cheese. The wedding day macaroni pie was deep, custardy, almost a pudding. A pound of elbow macaroni cooked al dente, drained, mixed with grated sharp cheddar, evaporated milk, 3 beaten eggs, a stick of butter, a sprinkle of dry mustard, salt, pepper. The mixture sat in a deep casserole dish that had once been a wedding gift to the bride's grandmother in 1934. The pie baked until the top was brown and the center was set. The corner pieces were promised to the woman who carried the pan, and nobody argued. By 1990, the deep casserole had cracked. The wedding macaroni was a shallow pan from a Sunday school cookbook, and the custardy texture had thinned to a stovetop sauce poured over the top. The pie was gone. Number 12, cheese straws on a silver tray that only came out for funerals and weddings. Pressing cheese straws through a cookie press on the Friday before a wedding in 1972 in Atlanta was a job for the bride's 2 oldest cousins. The dough was sharp cheddar, grated fine, blended with butter, flour, a shake of cayenne, salt. The cookie press squeezed it into long ribbons on a sheet pan. 20 minutes in a hot oven, broken into 3-inch sticks, cooled on a wire rack. The straws went onto a silver tray that had belonged to a great-great-aunt born during Reconstruction. The tray came out twice a year, weddings and funerals. Guests took 2 between 2 fingers. The straws were salty enough to ask for a cup of punch right after. By 1990, the cookie press had broken, the silver tray had tarnished black, and the cheese straws on the table came from a tin from the gift shop at the Atlanta airport. Number 11, candied yams with a marshmallow crust. The candied yam pan was the second sweetest dish on the savory side, and the only one a child would request a spoonful of before dinner. Yams sliced Friday night, parboiled, layered in a deep dish with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, a dash of orange juice, a single teaspoon of vanilla. The whole dish baked low and slow Saturday morning. 20 minutes before serving, the bride's aunt took the pan out, covered the top with miniature Kraft marshmallows in a single tight layer, and slid it back under the broiler until the marshmallows went brown on top and gooey underneath. The crust was the prize. Children stood by the pan with their plates already held out. The serving spoon was the same spoon her own mother had used at her own wedding in 1948. By 1989, the yams on the wedding table came from a Bruce's can. The marshmallow crust was a quick microwave layer, and the deep dish had been replaced by an aluminum half pan. The slow bake was gone. The ant was gone. The spoon was in a drawer. Number 10, spiral cut baked ham studded with pineapple rings. The pineapple ham on the buffet table in 1976 was a piece of theater. A whole shank ham, scored in a diamond pattern, studded with whole cloves, covered in canned pineapple rings, each pinned with a maraschino cherry held by a toothpick. Brown sugar packed thick over the top. A Coca-Cola poured into the bottom of the pan. The ham baked 4 hours, basted every 30 minutes until the glaze went dark and sticky. The carver was always an uncle who had served in Korea or Vietnam and could be trusted with a knife in front of a crowd. He carved slow, set each slice on a paper plate with a pineapple ring and the cherry still pinned to it. The pineapple was the marker. By 1989, the carved ham had been replaced by deli sliced ham in a foil tray. The pineapple rings were gone. The maraschino cherries were in a jar at the back of a pantry, and the uncle with the knife had retired to Florida. The theater was gone. Number 9, pastel cream cheese mints in paper cups. A great aunt in Memphis in 1973 mixed cream cheese with powdered sugar, peppermint extract, and food coloring on a Friday night kitchen table, pressed the dough into a rubber mold shaped like a wedding bell, and set the mints to dry overnight on wax paper. The mints came out pink, mint green, pale yellow, sometimes lavender. Each one was the size of a quarter. They sat in paper nut cups on the corner of the punch table, 2 or 3 per cup. Guests took one between thumb and finger, popped it on the tongue. The mint dissolved in 2 bites. The flavor was clean. By 1990, the rubber mold had cracked. The paper cups came pre-filled from a wedding supply, catalog, and the mints were a hard-pressed disc with no cream cheese in them at all. Number 8, chicken salad in puff pastry shells. On a long table in a church basement in Houston in 1970, 2 dozen golden pastry shells sat in rows on a doily-lined tray, each filled with a spoonful of chicken salad. The chicken had been poached Friday night from a whole fryer, picked from the bone by hand, chopped fine with celery and a hard-boiled egg, mixed with mayonnaise, a spoon of sweet pickle relish, a dash of curry powder, a pinch of white pepper. The pastry shells came from a Pepperidge Farm box in the freezer, baked Saturday morning until they puffed gold. The salad went into the shell with a small silver spoon topped with a sprig of parsley. Each shell was 1 bite, 2 at most. The platter sat next to the deviled eggs. By 1990, the curry powder was gone, the Pepperidge Farm box was replaced by a cracker, and the chicken salad sat in a bowl with a stack of Triscuits next to it. The shell was gone. Number 7, Auntie's potato salad in the same Tupperware bowl she had owned since 1962. Every wedding had one woman whose potato salad was the only potato salad. In a fellowship hall in Birmingham in 1975, the bowl came down the aisle in her own hands, a yellow Tupperware big enough to hold 10 pounds of salad, lid sealed shut Friday night to let the flavors marry. Russet potatoes boiled with skins on, peeled while warm, cubed, hard-boiled egg, sweet pickle relish, yellow mustard, mayonnaise, a spoon of pickle juice, a shake of celery seed. Paprika dusted across the top. The auntie carried the bowl herself, set it down herself, lifted the lid herself. Nobody else opened that lid. By 1992, the auntie had passed. The bowl was in her daughter's basement. The recipe lived in a niece's head, wrong, and the potato salad on the wedding table came from the deli case at Winn-Dixie. Number 6, cornbread dressing with giblet gravy. A separate pan, distinct from the chicken and dressing, sat on every wedding table in the Carolinas through the 1970s, holding a baked cornbread dressing whose only job was to soak the giblet gravy. The cornbread was made Thursday in a hot skillet, crumbled cold Friday, mixed Saturday with sage, chopped onion, sweated in butter, celery, 2 beaten eggs, a generous pour of broth from a turkey neck simmered in a small pot. The dressing baked in a deep aluminum pan until the top went brown. The giblet gravy came in a separate saucepan, ladled by the bride's grandmother into a gravy boat that had been a gift to her in 1951. Each plate got a spoonful of dressing and a flood of gravy on top. By 1990, the giblet pan was retired, the gravy came from a packet, and the dressing was a box mix on the table. By the way, if any of these dishes are pulling you back to a kitchen you remember, I put together a cookbook of the recipes done the old way, the way the elders would have set them on the table. Link is in the description. Now back to the list. Number 5, the bride's slice of white cake wrapped in a paper napkin and tucked into a purse. Number 5 on this list traveled home in a handbag because every guest who could not take a full plate took a slice of the bride's cake instead. The cake was the tall white tier on the corner table, 3 layers stacked, frosted in 7-minute frosting, topped with a plastic bride and groom from a Woolworths box. After the bride cut the first slice with her husband's hand over hers, a deacon's wife took the rest apart with a long knife. The slices went onto small paper plates. Guests who had to leave early wrapped a slice in a paper napkin from a stack on the table, tucked it into a purse, walked it home on a bus. A slice at home Sunday morning with coffee was the proof of attendance. By 1989, the takeaway slice had been replaced by a foil wrap piece in a printed box, and the napkin slice was gone. Number 4, caramel cake with the cooked icing. Caramel cake sat next to the coconut cake on every wedding table in central Alabama and Mississippi through the 1970s, and the cooked icing was what made it. A yellow butter cake in 3 layers, baked Friday, cooled overnight. Saturday morning, a woman in her 60s stood at the stove with a heavy copper pot, melting white sugar, dry until it went the color of amber, pouring in evaporated milk and butter, stirring until the syrup reached the soft ball stage. The icing had to be poured warm over the layers because if it cooled in the pot, it set into glass. Every minute counted. The cake came out shiny brown, smooth on the sides, the icing crystallizing into a thin candy crust that cracked when the knife went in. By 1989, the woman at the stove had passed, the copper pot was on a shelf, and the caramel icing on the wedding table came from a Pillsbury tub. The crust was gone. Number 3, iced tea with mint sprigs in glass pitchers. By 1974, in a fellowship hall in Greenville, 3 tall glass pitchers stood on the punch table, sweating in the August heat. Each held strong, sweet tea brewed in the morning, sweetened warm with a cup and a half of sugar, so the crystals dissolved before the ice went in, then poured over a tray of cubes from the ice machine in the church kitchen. A sprig of fresh mint, picked from a pot on the back stoop, floated in each pitcher. The mint was the marker that said this was a wedding pitcher, not a Sunday pitcher. Children carried paper cups from the table back to their grandmother. The tea was the engine of the afternoon. By 1992, the pitchers had been replaced by a plastic jug from a beverage tub, and the mint sprigs were gone from the back stoop because the apartment building had no stoop. Number 2, the groom's fruitcake slice in a little white box set on a card table by the door. Few people remember the groom's cake at a black Southern wedding because the bride's cake took every photograph. But on a side table in 1968 in Charleston sat a small fruitcake on a square doily, sliced into 1-inch pieces, each piece wrapped in wax paper and tucked into a small white box tied with a silver ribbon. The fruitcake had been baked 4 weeks earlier by an aunt with the heaviest hand for bourbon in the family. Pecans, candied cherries, raisins, citron, a dark batter soaked in liquor every Sunday until the wedding. Unmarried women at the reception were handed a box on the way out the door. The instruction was old, half a joke, half a wish. Sleep with the box under your pillow and dream of the man you will marry. By 1990, the boxes had stopped going out the door, the fruitcake had moved entirely into Christmas, and the unmarried women left the reception with nothing but a slice of white cake and a napkin. Number 1, pineapple sherbet floating in a crystal punch bowl. Every one of these tables in every basement in every black church, from Memphis to Newark in those years, had the same closing image. A crystal punch bowl set on a lace square filled with pale green pineapple sherbet from a Borton's carton, 3 bottles of cold ginger ale poured over, 2 cans of pineapple juice, a splash of canned grapefruit juice. The sherbet melted into the soda in slow swirls, foam rising over the rim. A long-handled silver ladle hung from the bowl's lip. Guests held out paper cups. The sherbet punch was the last thing on the table, the cold finish before the bride and groom were sent off in the car with rice in their hair. Chicken and cornmeal dumplings stretched one bird to feed an entire congregation when times were lean, but faith remained strong. Church mothers simmered a whole chicken until meat fell from bones, creating rich golden broth, fragrant with celery, onion, and bay leaf. Cornmeal dumplings were mixed by hand, combining cornmeal with flour, baking powder, and lard, then dropped by spoonfuls into bubbling broth. As they cooked, dumplings swelled and absorbed the chicken essence, becoming soft pillows floating in savory liquid. The dish was ladled into bowls at homecomings, repasts, and revival week suppers. This represented resourcefulness and community, showing how one chicken could become a feast through skilled hands and generous spirits willing to share whatever they had.
Lemon turkey legs turned ordinary afternoons into feasts that stretched across lawns and porches. Large turkey legs were rubbed with salt, black pepper, and a hint of paprika before spending hours in a slow smoker where hickory or oak wood filled the air with a deep, savory perfume. The meat cooked until it nearly fell from the bone, yet held enough bite to satisfy anyone who grabbed it by the handle and tore off a juicy piece. This portable meal was ideal for church picnics, outdoor fairs, or family reunions where plates were optional and conversation never paused. Children marveled at the size of each leg while adults admired the rich mahogany skin that crackled under gentle pressure. No one left hungry when a basket of smoked turkey legs appeared, and leftovers rarely survived the walk home. Their flavor spoke of patience, resourcefulness, and the simple art of turning inexpensive cuts into something grand, proving that the best meals often needed nothing more than smoke, time, and a crowd ready to gather and share the moment together in the open air.
Number 23, home canned ambrosia with hand-grated coconut. This was not the Cool Whip and Mandarin orange version that came later. The ambrosia of 1962 began in summer when a black household in Birmingham would put up oranges and pineapple from a roadside stand, sealing them in glass jars in the cellar. On Christmas Day, your mother opened a jar, drained the syrup into a saucepan to thicken, and grated a fresh coconut by hand on the side of a tin grater. The shavings curled into the bowl like white ribbons. A spoonful tasted like July sunshine in the middle of December. That was the whole point. By 1976, the canning equipment was pushed to the back of the pantry. Frozen fruit cocktail had taken its place. The coconut came pre-shredded in a bag, and nobody noticed how easy and how flat the bowl had become. The flavor of summer was gone. Smothered cabbage with ham hocks turned simple ingredients into something the entire congregation looked forward to all week. Church mothers simmered ham hocks until meat became tender and broth turned rich with smoky flavor. Cabbage was added in wedges, cooking down slowly until it absorbed pork essence while maintaining slight bite. Seasoned with black pepper, sugar to balance bitterness, and sometimes red pepper flakes, the dish was humble yet satisfying. Served alongside cornbread at Wednesday night. Suppers, smothered cabbage, provided nutrition and comfort while stretching modest ingredients. The dish represented generations of knowledge about coaxing maximum flavor from minimal resources. Though cabbage remains common, this slow-cooked preparation has largely disappeared, replaced by quicker methods.
Seven cobbler with pie crust strips was the kind of dessert that reminded people what home felt like. You could smell it before you even made it through the church door, that mix of cinnamon, butter, and baked peaches rising through the air like a sweet hymn. Someone's grandmother had brought it from home, wrapped tight in foil and tucked safely in the trunk of her car, so it would still be warm when service ended. The peaches were always ripe, soft from syrup or from the summer heat, and they melted into the crust like gold under sunlight. The pie strips were laid carefully across the top, never in perfect lines but always with love, brushed with melted butter until they baked into crisp ribbons that cracked softly with every scoop. A bowl of peach cobbler was more than dessert. It was reward for long sermons, for tired weeks, for the kind of patience that came from faith and family. The sweetness clung to your tongue and made every bite feel earned. No matter how many tables were filled with cakes or puddings, this one was always gone first. The elders called it real dessert, and the children licked their spoons clean, knowing this was what happiness tasted like.
Number 22, sweet potato pone baked in a cast iron skillet. Pone is what came before the pie. The grandmother of a Greenville, Mississippi household would grate raw sweet potatoes into a bowl with molasses, butter, an egg, a fistful of brown sugar, and grated nutmeg. The whole thing went into a hot iron skillet and baked until the edges turned dark and chewy, and the middle stayed soft like a soft pudding with a candy crust. You ate it warm with a glass of cold milk on Christmas afternoon, sitting on the porch in your church clothes. The day was quiet, the dish was loud. By 1979, the pone had been replaced by a smoother pie and a store-bought crust. Easier, prettier, not the same. The pone was rough, alive, and tasted like the dirt the potato came from. Chitlin loaf took the tradition of chitlins and transformed them into something convenient for church fellowship tables. After chitlins were thoroughly cleaned and boiled tender, they were chopped fine and mixed with cornmeal, eggs, onions, and seasoning to form a loaf. Baked until firm and sliced thick, it could be served at room temperature, perfect for potluck, tables where dishes needed to hold up. Church mothers who made chitlin loaf were respected for their patience, as preparing chitlins required hours of careful work. The dish appeared at watch night services when traditional foods held deep significance. For many, it represented preserving ancestral foodways and honoring traditions even when shortcuts tempted. Chitlin loaf was heritage shaped into slices, served with pride where memory and faith gathered together.
Wild plum. Chutney stew with vegetables turned what butchers once gave away into luxury dishes saved for special occasions. Oxtails were browned in large pots until caramelized, then simmered for hours with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and herbs until meat became fall-apart tender and bones released gelatin into rich, thick broth. The result was deeply flavorful stew that tasted expensive despite costing almost nothing. Church women understood oxtails required patience and long cooking, teaching younger cooks the value of slow preparation. The bones cost pennies per pound at Black-owned butcher shops. The stew stretched small amounts of meat to feed large crowds, with vegetables adding bulk and nutrition, while gelatinous broth created satisfaction. Oxtail stew appeared at anniversary dinners and homecoming celebrations, signaling this was meal worth attending. The dish proved that proper technique could transform what others discarded into something genuinely special.
Number 20, mincemeat pie made with venison and apple. Most people now believe mincemeat is British and contains no meat. The Black Southern version proves both ideas wrong. A cook in rural Alabama would simmer ground venison or beef neck with chopped apple, raisins, sweet, brown sugar, cinnamon, allspice, and a splash of cider until the whole thing became dark and thick like the inside of a fruitcake. It went into a deep dish, pie crust, and baked until the kitchen smelled like a tavern in October. You ate it warm with a hard sauce of butter, sugar, and bourbon. The slice was rich enough that one was enough. By 1974, supermarket mincemeat in a jar had replaced the homemade version, and the meat was gone. Today, most people have never tasted the real thing. The pie was strange and absolutely the food of a celebration. Hoppin' John carried African spiritual symbolism and Southern practicality into church fellowship halls, especially on New Year's Day when the dish promised luck and prosperity. Church mothers combined black-eyed peas with rice, onions, and smoked pork, simmering everything until flavors melded into something greater than individual parts. The peas symbolized coins, and when served alongside collard greens representing paper money, the meal became both sustenance and blessing. It appeared at watch night services and New Year's gatherings where congregations celebrated together. The dish stretched to feed dozens, perfect for church suppers where budgets were tight but hospitality generous. Hoppin' John represented the blending of African foodways with Southern ingredients, a tradition that survived the Middle Passage.
Gula Red molasses spice cookies filled kitchens with the warm scent of cinnamon, ginger, and cloves long before guests knocked on the door. Dark molasses gave each cookie a deep sweetness and a chewy texture that stayed tender for days, making them ideal for storing in tins or carrying to church gatherings. Butter and brown sugar blended with the spices created a dough that chilled briefly before baking into perfectly cracked tops, dusted with a light coating of sugar. Each bite offered a comforting balance of sweet heat and earthy richness, the kind of flavor that paired perfectly with a glass of milk or a steaming cup of coffee. Children eagerly rolled the dough into small balls while parents handled the hot baking sheets, turning cookie making into a family ritual. Whether stacked on holiday plates or tucked into lunch pails, molasses spice cookies traveled well and satisfied even the strongest sweet craving. They became a year-round favorite for families who cherished recipes that felt both festive and familiar, proving that the simplest ingredients could create an aroma and taste that lingered lovingly in memory long after the last crumb disappeared from the jar.
Number 25, fresh-killed Christmas hen with sage gravy. The bird came from the yard back then, not the freezer. A grandmother in Edna Lewis's Freetown, Virginia would walk out at dawn on Christmas Eve, pick the hen herself, and have it plucked, drawn, and rubbed with sage and lard before the children were awake. The cavity was packed with stale cornbread, onion, and a single egg. The drippings became a gravy you ladled over white rice, and your aunt would tell you the flavor was something you would chase your whole life and never find again. Picture a kitchen with the wood stove going since 5 in the morning. Imagine the smell. By 1978, the Yardbirds were gone. The supermarket sold a butterball in plastic, and the sage gravy lost its center. The hen was not just dinner, it was the year saying thank you. Salmon croquettes were a Friday staple in African-American church kitchens, where canned salmon transformed into golden, crispy patties, feeding the faithful during Lenten seasons. Church mothers mixed salmon with sautéed onions, eggs, cracker crumbs, and seasonings, shaping mixture into oval patties before frying until exterior turned crackling brown. The inside remained moist with salmon's richness enhanced by onion. These croquettes appeared at fish fry fundraisers and Friday night suppers when meat was avoided. Canned salmon was economical yet nutritious, providing protein without requiring fresh fish many communities could not access. Salmon croquettes represented practicality and tradition, their golden crust beloved across generations until convenience foods replaced handmade versions.
Sweet potato pie held a place of honor at Black church Christmas dinners, and only certain women were trusted to bake it. The pies were never made casually. They represented the signature of the matriarch, a recipe passed down through whispered instructions and watchful eyes in family kitchens. Sweet potatoes were roasted slowly until their sugars concentrated, then mashed smooth and mixed with eggs, evaporated milk, brown sugar, vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg. The filling was poured into buttery crusts and baked until the tops turned glossy and slightly cracked at the edges. Unlike pumpkin pie, which dominated white American tables, sweet potato pie carried African American flavor preferences, warmer, spicier, and deeply comforting. The first slice at church dinners always went to the eldest member present, and no one dared ask for seconds until everyone had been served. Sweet potato pie was legacy made edible, carrying stories of grandmothers and great-grandmothers in every bite.
Number 21, chitterlings simmered overnight with red pepper. This was the Christmas Eve dish in working-class black households from Detroit to New Orleans. The intestines came in a 5-gallon bucket from the butcher, and the grandmothers of the family spent a full afternoon cleaning them under cold running water in the backyard. The pot simmered all night with onion, garlic, vinegar, and crushed red pepper, and the smell sat in the curtains for a week. You ate them on Christmas Day with hot sauce and a slice of white bread. The flavor was hard, earthy, and absolutely a holiday food. Booker T. Washington wrote about this very tradition at Christmas more than a century ago. By the late 1970s, the cleaning ritual was vanishing. Younger cousins refused the chore. Grocery chains stopped stocking the hog tubs. Within one generation, the dish moved from a centerpiece to a memory. Neck bones and butter beans filled fellowship halls with comfort only slow-cooked food could provide. Church mothers simmered smoked pork neck bones for hours until meat became tender enough to fall apart at the touch of a fork. Butter beans absorbed the smoky, salty essence of pork as they cooked down into creamy softness. The broth turned silky, seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and onion. This dish appeared at Wednesday night suppers and special fellowship gatherings when something hearty was needed. It stretched inexpensive cuts into meals, satisfying both body and spirit, providing complete protein and warmth. Though rarely seen on modern tables, neck bones and butter beans proved that church kitchens could transform scarcity into abundance through faith and patience.
Bones and rice appeared at black church Christmas dinners as proof that the most flavorful cuts were often the ones others overlooked. Pork neck bones were cheap and considered undesirable by many, but church mothers understood that bones meant marrow, and marrow meant richness. The neck bones were first browned in a heavy pot, then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and seasoning until the meat fell from the bones and the broth turned silky from rendered collagen. Rice was cooked in that same broth, absorbing every drop of the smoky, porky flavor until each grain glistened with richness. The dish was served in deep bowls, the tender meat piled over rice with plenty of potlikker for sopping with cornbread. Children learned to navigate around bones, sucking out every bit of marrow and meat their elders had taught them to value. Neck bones and rice represented the ingenuity of black cooks who turned what others discarded into dishes that satisfied both body and soul during the leanest times.
Number 18, divinity candy in 3 colors. Divinity is a meringue made with hot sugar syrup, beaten by hand until the candy turns soft and white and holds a peak. A woman in Birmingham would make 3 batches, tinting one pink with strawberry, one pale green with mint, and leaving one white and studded with toasted pecans. The pieces were dropped by the spoonful onto wax paper and left on the counter to set like little snowdrifts the size of a quarter. You were allowed 1 piece on Christmas Eve and 1 on Christmas morning. That was the whole rule. By the early 1980s, store-bought candy filled the holiday bowls. The hand mixer that divinity required sat unused. The candy demanded dry weather and a steady hand, and the women who knew the trick of it were no longer teaching it. What most people miss is how much the weather mattered. A humid kitchen would ruin the batch. Pig feet and sauerkraut brought together African American cooking traditions with influences from German immigrants throughout the South. Church mothers cleaned and split pig feet, then simmered them slowly until collagen broke down into gelatinous, silky texture. Sauerkraut was added during final hours, its tangy sharpness cutting through the richness of pork and creating unexpected balance. The finished dish was tender, slightly sour, deeply satisfying, served with cornbread to soak up flavorful liquid. It appeared at church suppers during winter months when heartier fare sustained the congregation through cold evenings. Though some modern palates might hesitate, those who grew up with pig feet and sauerkraut remember it fondly as a dish that filled bellies and connected communities across cultural lines. By 1990, the sherbet punch was gone, replaced by a plastic gallon of pre-mixed punch in a single color, and the long-handled ladle was in a drawer next to a takeout menu. Drop in the comments the dish your own family put on the wedding table. Maybe it was the coconut cake your grandmother spent 2 days on, the one she would not let anybody help her bake. Maybe it was the punch in the borrowed crystal bowl your great-aunt carried out of her own china cabinet for one Saturday in 1971. These tables in those church basements were never about the catering. They were about the hands that set the platter down and the women who had been promised the kitchen at 15. The promise outlasted the platter. Tell me which one your family remembers.